Thomas, is Europe up to Rem and David's dawning challenge that if this needs to be managed in this area of complexity while still being cars, and Europe's falling out of the sky, then you have to reevaluate it. If Europe can pull itself together, then you have a different chess piece on the board and can do different things. But because of the immediate crisis, and I'm interested in your comment about this, by December, it seems to me that chess piece will be fundamentally different, for better or for worse. But I mean, doesn't that really predicate a lot of this? We're looking at one end, and if we're going to look at the West, at least two poles of power, if not more, have to be looked at. So how does it look to you on the front lines of trying to manage what is a terrifying crisis?
Well, very good point, John. Of course, it takes two to tango, and Europe has not been exactly keeping up the pace over the past few months. I think it's been tremendously damaging to the transatlantic relationship that Europe, far from being seen as a partner, has been seen over the past few months in Washington, correct me if I'm wrong, as a liability. I mean, Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, feels it important enough to come to a meeting of Eurozone finance ministers because, by God, these guys don't know what they're doing and they might well bring the global economy down. That alone tells you, A, that obviously we may be on the brink of a serious crisis, but B, how do you propose to begin repairing a relationship in which one of the partners doesn't see the other not only as a contributor, but actually sees him as a liability and a potential danger to the global economy? And every single debate we will have today has to address and has to begin with addressing that fundamental question. There can be no talk of repairing the relationship if one of the sides is seen as a liability and a danger to the entire world economy. I'm not saying it is. I'm talking about perceptions, and perceptions matter. Having said that, of course, the relationship has changed for the worse on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think it's important we talk about the changes in an open-minded way. Johnny warned us against too much gloom and doom, and I don't want to do that. But it is the CR's motto to be pro-European, but not uncritically so, and that's how I feel about the alliance. I'm a card-carrying member of the Slovak Atlantic Commission, but I think it's important we talk about the differences honestly and openly. And one of the, and it's when I do that, I have to address some of the key challenges on the U.S. side as well. It's a fact that there has been a generational change in the United States. Bob Gates had it absolutely right. You can dismiss his speech from June of this year as perhaps too doomy and gloomy, and I myself wrote he hasn't given enough credit to the Europeans for the good work they did in Libya, but he was absolutely right in warning against the generational change. It affects the next generation of politicians. It is already the case that America's best officers don't want to serve in European Command, much rather go to Central Command or the Pacific Command. The United States is ceasing to be a European power, and that is something we need to address today as well. There has been a complete shift of interest, both in Europe and in the US. Again, in 1999, Madeleine Albright went before, 1997 actually, I think, when making the case for enlarging NATO. Yeah. Madeleine Albright went before Jesse Helms and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and said, we have to do this because at the end of the day, the United States is a European power. Well, that's no longer the case. The things that the United States worries about these days tended to shift to or originate from the broader Middle East, or of course, increasingly so from Asia. Areas where Europe is frankly not much of a help, in broader Middle East, somewhat of a help, in the Pacific, frankly not at all. Hence, correspondingly, U.S. interest in maintaining the relationship has gone down. And the last point I want to make, just to throw it out on the table and make sure that we address it, is the politics of crisis. I think the fact that we are in the midst of what appears to be, even without further sort of doom-mongering, and even assuming that we're going to avoid the worst possible scenario, which is a collapse of the Eurozone, we are already in a crisis, in a recession by all indications. And I think that's going to have an interesting psychological impact on the states. I think Gideon Rachman had it absolutely right in his book, A Zero-Sum World, when he wrote that countries increasingly see cooperation, cross-border cooperation, not as a zero-sum game in which we contribute but everybody wins, but as something that detracts from national resources and something that weakens you. It's an irrational analysis. I think all of us at the table and in the room would agree that is simply fundamentally wrong. But we're talking about human psychology. In the psychology of crisis, you turn down, you turn inwards, you close down, you begin to be a little less empathetic, you begin to adopt a little less enlightened definition of national self-interest. We're becoming all a little more protective, a little more close. And I think that's going to affect the relationship as well. I think we'll have a lot less patience for each other, and I think we'll be a lot less inclined to see the cooperation of one another as a win-win situation. And in combination with all the other things I mentioned, the shift in interest on the US side, Europe's inability to manage its own finances, and therefore its emergence as a liability on the US psyche, as well as the generational change I mentioned, I think those four factors are going to make make our work difficult. Not impossible. I continue to be an optimist, but we need to address them today.